Hello and welcome back to Swing State, where we explore stories of continuous learning, courage, and leadership from around the world. I'm your host, Mina Johl, and today's guest is Vinod Aravindakshan, an educator, innovator, and a philosopher whose work bridges corporate boardrooms, campus corridors, and ancient wisdom traditions. Vinod is a teaching professor at the Indian Institute of Technology, advising placement offices across multiple IITs and mentoring thousands of students in the recent times. He heads Career Bolt, a nonprofit that democratizes job-ready training for both students and young professionals. As a former HR director at CDK Global, and senior HR business partner at Cisco, Vinod has led multiple initiatives in organizational design, recruiting, diversity, and inclusion. Most remarkably, Vinod is translating and authoring English commentaries on the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita, ensuring these millennia-old Indian teachings are not lost to the modern world. Tonight, we'll talk about Vinod's background and his evolution, his leadership decisions and styles, some of his own personal learnings along the way, and the legacy and advice he wants to leave us with. Every question will underscore continuous improvement, self-motivation, resilience, and learning, lessons that resonate no matter where you live. Vinod, thanks for being here.
Mina, I'm super happy to be in this call. Thank you for the generous introduction.
You shifted from India to the US and back to India. What inspired you to make each of these pivots?
My career growth, right, it's been very atypical. It's not a standard profile. So I began as an engineer. I worked in manufacturing for a couple of years and then decided I want to do my master's. So I did my master's, went to work in South Korea. I did an MBA later. I then started working in the US. Goal behind all these transitions was that I wanted to experience a different company, different location. On the outset, you look at these two different jobs when I began my career and my last job, they seem like poles apart. But at the end of the day, there's so much learnings you get from each one of these experiences. One of them being that when you work in a manufacturing setup, you have an eye for efficiency. You have an eye to cut costs. You have an eye to find the waste. In Japanese, we call that mudas. We find waste, we eliminate the waste as much as possible. Once you bring that engineering mindset into HR, it works really, really well. And one so-called superpower I always had was that I was among the very, very few people who had a manufacturing background, made a switch to HR, and I would always sell that as my skill, which made me uniquely different from others. So I encourage everyone to explore different areas early in your career, identify one sweet spot, be there, try to be the best you can, and that might involve you moving across locations, taking up different roles. And I try to grab all these opportunities when it came up, and that pretty much defines my journey from India to South Korea and to US, where I ended up working in the Silicon Valley.
And how did you remain true to your own learning journey?
Okay, so that's a really good question. So one thing I would always ask myself every single day is that did I learn something new every single day? So I feel that if you do not answer that question well, that means that you are just doing your job and you're not really making an impact. So there are two things which is happening here when you do a job. One is that the company has got to benefit from you. That's why they're paying you big bucks. The second thing is you got to learn something. You need to feel passionate about the job. So the company has to get something from you. You got to get something from the company. So as long as you have that mindset of trying to learn every single day, it doesn't matter which sector it is. You can begin in manufacturing and you can learn a lot of great stuff in manufacturing. And you know what? You can actually apply many of those principles back to, say, support functions like human resources, finance, etc. So keep learning, try to find unique ways of applying your knowledge to different scenarios. And in my case, it worked really well. A function like HR, which is typically not very disruptive. You bring in new ideas and everybody's going to listen to you. So I think one of the reasons why I would say I got a bunch of promotions in probably 6 years of working in Silicon Valley. And that was because I just brought a slightly different flavor to the table from a regular HR person. And the more different you are, the more likely you're going to be noticed. So I think that's probably one way in which I was able to take my career forward.
When you did decide to come back to India and work with now a completely different set of audience, the universities, students, what really inspired that And what was your goal? What did you want to achieve through that shift?
I worked in the Silicon Valley till 2022. At that point of time, my career was going really well. So it was like had to make a decision at that point of time, right? A bunch of my friends working in the best startups in the San Francisco region, they're all calling me saying, "Hey, Vinod, you're already here in the Bay Area. Why don't you join us?" And had offers come from other companies for senior HR director. And I knew that once I get into the track of being a senior HR director, then I'll probably stick around till I become a VP and then senior VP and then CHRO. It was a point of time where I had to decide like what's important for me. Is it making money, growing up in career? Is that the most important thing? But I would always ask myself, what's the purpose of me? Who's going to benefit from it? I work in a company, of course the company benefits, but is there a larger impact I can create beyond the company I work in? So that's a question I asked myself. And I think everyone has a unique answer to it. Like some people are like, okay, they're going to give back to the community in some way or the other. I just had a sense that I could give back to the community in a much larger way. I had no idea what it was at that point of time, but I was like, okay, let me take a break from this cycle of like promotions and compensation and being in the Bay Area to doing something different. Let me explore that for a couple of years. I could always come back to these older jobs whenever I wanted. So I took a break at that point of time, decided to explore on a sabbatical, come back to India, try to explore how the situation is. I initially thought of working on a startup, but then when I came back to India, there's just a tremendous amount of gaps which I saw in the landscape. One of the IITs suggested, hey, why don't you work with us since you bring a very different skill set to the table. So I started working there, and I just felt that there's just a lot of gaps when it comes to the student skill sets in India because for some reason, everyone just thinks that I just finished my degree, I get a great job. And that's not the way it works. So I think in the US, over time, you learn that you got to fend for yourself. There's nothing called campus placements, which will help you find a job. You got to prepare for jobs yourself. And I try to infuse students with the same mentality back in India. The good thing is that by doing that, I'm able to touch the lives of thousands of students. I would say that is one of the most critical things which brought me back the wish to explore. But now I'm seeing meaning in terms of touching the lives of a large number of people.
Having a larger than life goal sets you on a different journey. You've been deeply engaged in translating Sanskrit texts into English commentaries. I'm curious to learn both how has engaging with ancient wisdom expanded your perspective on emotional intelligence, resilience, learning, change management, and all of these wonderful things.
Great question, Mina. So a couple of points I want to bring forward, right? So when we say ancient wisdom, we should just remember that all of our ancestors also lived lives exactly like us, right? I mean, all of them had their great opportunities. They all could travel. They could do a lot of things. They had to be with their families, take care of their communities, the society, and so on. So it's not really that their challenges are any different. It's just that the scenario has changed a little bit, technology has changed things a little bit, but at the end of the problems are still the same. Every 8,000 years back, there was agricultural revolution, and there's just a hell lot of change happening in the landscape, and you had to adapt to the new way of life. And that's similar to the technology revolution we are facing right now. We are also trying to adapt to this new way of life. So something which really surprised me is that I think India is probably the only civilization in the entire world which has got an unbroken continuity. There's actually a great research paper by a University of Wisconsin professor from the anthropology department where he talks about worship sites in India which were 12,000 years old. There are a group of tribals who are still worshipping that same temple for the past 12,000 years without a break. So there's a sort of continuity of civilization in India. Even if you don't take these things seriously, right? Even if you're not a religious person by heart, I think there's still something about it, right? I mean, there is something about our ancestors, about the knowledge they had, an unbroken chain which has been around for such a long time, which I think we should all appreciate as human beings. Any Western country, if you really ask them what was the situation years back, 3,000 years back, it's going to be a blank. There's nothing much they can talk about, right? But then India's got a very different story, right? There is an unbroken chain of information being transmitted from generation to generation without a break. So just in terms of cultural curiosity, I think it's good to just ask yourself, okay, there's all these things out there, all these books out there. You read them and ask the question, is it any of this even relevant today? That's actually what got me interested in these ancient books. I just feel that these questions are timeless. There's a code of conduct people live by, which is extremely ancient. So this is not just Indian tradition, but it's probably guide to the entire world, right? Everybody in the world sources their history from such ancestral traditions. Just like all of us came from Africa at one point of time, right? It's similar to that, right? In terms of tradition, we all source it from very, very ancient civilization. So I think that got me interested. But in terms of like how does all of this work on philosophy impact my daily life? Like I just think that you have a larger picture of life, right? So I think these are great paradigms to shift your perspective from one end to the other. And you look at large scale impact, you ask how best can you utilize your skills to benefit the world in a positive manner. And I think these are absolutely fantastic ways by which ancient wisdom still continues to guide people.
That's so beautifully put, Vinod. What I admire about how these ideas from Indian philosophy transcend is that whether somebody is listening from Canada or anywhere else, the essence of self-awareness and the purpose is universal. You feel it in your bones. You don't have to be a Hindu or from Indian descent to feel the impact and the profoundness. And translating some of these words of ancient literature and our philosophies is going to make it very accessible to not just our own youth within the country, but youth across the world. For example, every day in my yoga class, we begin with Om and we end with Om. As we end our session, we bow to the great divine for allowing us a body that carries us through the days and nights, for giving us a mind that is capable of so much more. And so I find there are subtle ways that the West has adopted the Indian philosophies that is so embedded in now their lifestyles. They may not realize it explicitly, but the impact is profound.
I think one of the problems with modern society is that people tend to look down on the past. We all assume that the problems we face today, we are the first people to face these problems, and we are like, okay, like how do we find the answers for some of the problems we face today? We have been through multiple changes in terms of technological shifts in the past, so it's like, can we learn from the past? I think that's super important. So, for example, if you take, say, Greek philosophy, you read about Aristotle and Plato and so on. Like, even if you do not care about who they are, they probably used to worship like Zeus and Apollo and so on. You probably don't worship any of them right now, right? But still, the philosophy matters. Their perspective matters because you can learn a lot. Like Plato's caveman is still a very commonly used trope in philosophy even today. Likewise, I think Indian philosophy has a lot to offer because there's a lot of commonality across, I wouldn't call it religion, I would call it dharmic faiths, which includes Hindu thought, Buddhist thought, Jain thought, Sikh thought. They have a lot of commonalities which we don't realize. For example, they believe in samsara, they believe in karma. And you know what? The West today is also asking the same questions. So you don't find meaning in the way philosophy has arisen in the West. There's no way to define purpose and meaning. So purpose and meaning have to come from somewhere, and that's been very clearly defined in Eastern philosophy. It's more of like people are trying to adopt some of their ideas. Karma is a very, very common word in US. Everyone knows what karma is, surprisingly. The second thing is, when I was working in Silicon Valley, almost every single person used to do yoga on the weekends. Every single person. There's not a single did not do yoga. They used to come and ask me, hey, what does chakras, what does this mean? What is the Muladhara chakra? And I don't know much at that point of time. I was like, I have no idea. But that just speaks to the volumes that sometimes Indians are more disconnected with their past than even Americans are from the Indian past.
I can run behind that thought for sure. I'm someone who found yoga as a practice after I moved outside of India, which is both ridiculous, it's funny, and it's a shame because you grew up in pretty much the roots of all of these things in the world, and then you have to move across the seven oceans to really become familiar with that one-to-one. But I'm glad that in life, yoga as a philosophy, as a way of life has caught up with me, and I sense a lot of people, irrespective of where they are from in the world, have an appreciation for the kind of common language that yoga tends to speak. Our philosophies are profound, are widespread, and through some targeted efforts like the ones that you are focused on, I think our philosophies will be both enriched and lived widely. I want to know, you mentioned about yoga, your friends here in Silicon Valley were doing yoga and you probably weren't that interested at that point in time. But is there any micro ritual that you practice daily across, whatever interests you, but that helps you maintain that openness, that curiosity, even in times of high pressure?
Good question, Mina. So I'm going to suggest a framework which I think is going to be very important for every person to check in terms of are they really adding value to both themselves and to society. This is like imagine three concentric circles touching each other. So let's call one of the circles as karma, the other circle as dharma, and the third circle as satva. So it's okay. I taught this to students in my course, NPTEL course, as a way to help them gauge are they really making progress in their life and are they doing the right thing, right? So this is the framework I suggested. So three concentric circles. One is karma, the other one is dharma, the other one is satva. So let's look at these terms, right? These are all Sanskrit terms. Let's get into more detail of what this means. So the way karma is defined is typically something where you're very, very passionate about doing that work, not necessarily for the money it would give you at the end of the day. I mean, it's not like you have to do it for free. You can get paid for it, that's fine. But even outside money, you should be passionate about that space. Right? Let me give an example. So if you're doing an MBA degree, you have no interest in finance, but then you decide to take up a finance job just because it pays well. So that's not a karmic activity, right? I mean, you're somewhere losing track of the fact that, like, hey, your passion is not there. You're just trying to fake interest so that you get paid, right? So that's not a karmic action. So ask yourself, whatever you're doing that day, right, or in the next couple of months, ask yourself, are you really doing for the money? Or do you really have a genuine passion for the space you are in? So that's one way of looking at it. The second concentric circle you got to be looking at is this realm of dharma. In terms of, are you really adding value to the larger community around yourself? That's a question you got to ask yourself. Like, as an example, I would say, again, this is probably not a great example, but if you're working, say, in the space of AI, you're trying to automate all the other jobs which are out there. You're getting paid hundreds of millions, like I think Meta is now paying people like tens of millions of dollars every year. So it's like you're trying to automate jobs away. So yes, you are going to gain in the short term. You're going to get rich in the short term, but is that positively impacting people and the community around you? Right. So that's a question you got to ask yourself. So I think many of us tend to forget that our actions have ramifications for the future. So if you have a family, if you have children, the world you help create today will be passed on to your children. So if you really mess up with the world, you try to make it as bad as possible. Maybe you may not be there physically to reap the consequences, but then somebody else, it could be your nephews, it could be your nieces. I mean, there's always relatives we're going to face it the next generation. So look at it from that perspective, right? What sort of world are you leaving behind by your actions? That's one thing. The sattva is something which is more linked to, say, more of like spiritual development by doing good stuff. So sattva, the way I would define it is, at the end of the day, do you feel happy? Right? Do you feel excited when you come back to work? Come back from work, are you like, okay, I did a good job today? And next day, do you wake up feeling that, hey, I could continue doing this job is good, it's making a positive impact, people around me are getting uplifted, and I'm also getting uplifted. There is a virtuous cycle you can create by following the realm of sattva, by impacting people around you in a good and positive manner. So as long as whatever you do fits these circles of lack of focus on money, right, doing it for passion, money can be there. I'm not saying that that's not important, but do not determine your actions only on the focus of monetary gains. Look at other perspectives. So that's karma. Dharma is again about the impact you create on the world around you. And the third one, the bigger thing is like, are you spiritually on a high, able to positively impact the world around you in a way where you feel that everybody has gone higher because of your actions? So if you can merge these three circles, make them intersect, and if you can find a sweet spot in between, I think that's the best place to be in. So I think that's probably a great micro ritual. The first time you do it is going to look a little tough, but every day you keep asking these questions, I think you'll end up in a sweet spot.
That's a great framework that you've shared today. I think the way that it resonates with my work is that I've rooted a lot of my consulting and coaching ideas in terms of ikigai, which is not exactly an overlap, but very similar in terms of, what are you passionate about? What does the world need? And what can you get paid for? At the center of all of these three is probably the thing that will make you happy, fulfill a larger purpose, and sustain life with what you're doing. But what you've mentioned now is also the reason I started this podcast, because I I kept coming back to this idea of how do we grow as individuals, as leaders, not just in our careers, but really in our lives. You talked about how we latch on to the past, mistakes, errors, tragedies that have happened at an individual or a societal level. While the past does inform our better decision making and judgment, it should not in any way confine us from and prevent us from achieving our goals or reaping the benefits that we could sow by doing the right things in our present for a better future. And so many different philosophies. When you were illustrating the three concentric circles and what each of them means and how they tie in together, I couldn't help but think Christianity preaches the same. Greek philosophy preaches the same. Chinese, Japanese, they all talk about the same philosophy. You talk about reinforcement theory in the Western culture, or you talk about, the yin and the yang in China, or you talk about, just a servant leadership in more a corporate setting or ethical capitalism and things like that. Mindfulness and wellness has become such a huge domain practice within human resources in corporate America and Canada, everywhere else in the world as well, that, it just, these elements tie in. And I think this goes back to what we were talking about earlier, which is the Indian way of life, the Indian philosophy, the Indian thought process is so widely accepted, much beyond what is on the media or what is explicitly available for us to track in terms of statistics, that it's hard to not celebrate it. I want to add more value, not want to spread it even faster like wildfire and get people to adopt it in more explicit ways. But I love the work that you're doing, not only serving your larger purpose, but you're really bringing together from your own perspective, both the uniqueness as well as the inclusivity, as well as the comprehensiveness of our philosophy and olden, ancient wisdom. So really kudos to you for that on both a personal level and here.
Mina, two quick thoughts, right? I mean, you raise very, very valid points. So, some things I just want to make sure I'm getting across well to the audience is that we need to be scientific, right? I mean, that's very important. Nobody has to absorb anything which is illogical, is not scientific, and so on. That's not what we are talking about today, right? We are only talking about the fact that our ancestors have faced very similar problems. They've come out of it successfully, right? And we do not know whether we will face this successfully, but we know that this has happened in the past. So that's point one, right? That's where the learning comes from in terms of how did they face the problems? How did they come out victoriously? Point one. Second point is that which again I feel that we just don't spend enough time on reflecting over this fact that most civilizations last probably 300 years, maybe 500 years, maybe 700 years, right? That's all a civilization lasts. Even the Greek civilization only lasted so much. The Romans are all gone. They've been gone for like thousands of years. We still talk about them, but they don't exist anymore. So compared to every civilization which has probably lasted 300 years, 400 years, right? You have an example of a civilization which has lasted probably for like, it's probably 8 to 10,000 years. The reason why I'm saying this is because most of the texts in India were orally transmitted for a very, very long time. And there was a professor from Oxford saying that the first Rig Veda, for example, was probably written down at least 6 to 7,000 years earlier. But it's probably much older. It is written down at that time, right? So it's probably much older than that. So what I'm trying to say is that suppose something has been evolutionarily successful and has been very stable in terms of the ideas from the earliest books are still being practiced today. Like
you meet with students on maybe a daily basis or many students on a daily basis. How are you able to translate some of this wisdom into words that they can make sense of?
It's a very valid question because I think today is the age of AI. A lot of jobs are disappearing and there are no hiring happening for entry-level jobs. So I think everybody feels perplexed. They're like, okay, what should I do next? Is there something I need to be doing? Should I tweak my strategy? Should I optimize my job search process, right? Everybody's trying to optimize or do something different. They're trying to rework their resumes, do better interview prep and so on. So what I keep telling students when I meet them, and I meet a lot of them, I probably talk to like thousands of students across IITs in India. I talked to at least like 10 to 12 of the IITs so far. I've talked to the placement officers, talked to lots of students. And a common theme is not to be dictated too much by the pressures of the present. Even if you have like crazy problems facing you today, that may not be the problem which you face, say, 1 year down the line, 2 years down the line, 5 years down the line, a decade later. So, as an example, I would say that when you want to get your first job, you have no work experience. That's probably the toughest time in your life. The moment you start getting work experience, you're going to be a lot more valued in the workplace. The pressures you will face after you have 3 years of work experience is very different from a situation where you don't have any work experience. So I think we tend to look at the problems today, we tend to draw linear extrapolation and then assume that the same problems are going to be with us for the future, for the foreseeable future. And that's not how the world works. Like every year, your challenges are going to change, your problems are going to change, and you have to come up with new solutions. So just because AI is impacting jobs today, you may see it as an agent of destruction, right? And what I challenge people is, do not look at things from that way. There are going to be some jobs which are getting eliminated, some jobs which are getting created, but there's always going to be variations, right? So go to a different framework. Like stop responding to the situation on a daily basis. Ask yourself again, going back to the frameworks we discussed earlier, look at what the karma, dharma, and the sattvic framework. So ask yourself, where is a genuine passion? Where is it you can create an impact on the world, and what is that one job which really inspires you, right? And start doing that work on a daily basis, right? So like you probably are doing a different job, but then you want to change jobs. Try to like learn something about this job you want to be in every single day, and you will get better. After 6 months you see a lot of progress. After 1 year you see a lot more progress. Be passionate, be interested, stop responding to the situation on a daily basis. Look at the long-term goals and be guided by the long-term perspective, right? If you do that, I'm sure all these people are going to do very well in the future. When I look back at my own career, the first job seems super, super critical and important to me. But then when I look back now after decades, when I look back, it's like it was the most inconsequential job ever. What I'm doing now has like zero connection to what I did at the beginning of my career. And I'm sure this is how it's going to be with many people. So I think just letting go, looking at the big picture, I think will help everyone a lot more.
I tend to think that readiness to be able to take on different challenges in life, whether those be personal or professional, comes from resilience. The basic foundation of knowing life is going to throw at me different curveballs at different stages of my life. How I deal with them, I may not fully understand now, but I'm going to let myself go through the journey of learning, embracing, pivoting when it needs to, and just moving along. The never say never kind of resilient approach. And you may scrape your knees and your elbows, or your thoughts. But if you have that overarching capacity to understand that there is a larger purpose to what you're going through right now. Vinod and I started in careers where what we did in the first 3 to 5 years of our professional lives had little to no bearing outside of the learning that it informed us with as we stepped into maybe year 15, 16, and so on. And so people's lives evolve, people's thoughts evolve. But how you really build yourself block by block like a Lego structure, how you practice these little frameworks like the one that Vinod shared earlier in the conversation today, are really going to define how you tackle challenges as they present themselves to you, because they will. Today it's AI and Trump's trade war. Tomorrow it's going to be something else, and the day after it's going to be something else that we never even expect. So be ready. Be thoughtful, be engaged. Thanks a lot, Vinod, for sharing your thoughts, the impact that you're generating. And the one question I do want to ask before I have to let you go is that amongst all of these wonderful things that you're doing, what is that one achievement that you would call your legacy?
So, I want to apply the same principles I was talking about to myself. I'm doing certain things today. That does not mean that that is all I'm going to do for the entirety of my life, right? I mean, life is going to change. I'm also going to change in the future. Just like you mentioned, right? I'm going to experiment. I'm going to learn every single day. I think once you have a certain passion in the space you're in, right, you will find learning fun, right? I think when we talk about resilience, getting knocked down and so on, right? Sometimes it looks as if like we're gonna get beaten up, and hey God, like you're getting beaten up in a boxing ring, you got to get up and fight again. I mean, ultimately, for leaving a legacy behind, you got to do a lot of hard work over decades for anything to happen. And hopefully, I find that one spot. Like hopefully, some of the stuff I'm doing right now, but then I'm gonna evaluate myself again and again. And if I make some genuine contributions which others have not, I think one closing thought I want to guide everyone is that this is something I was thinking about yesterday, the way we lead our lives. So imagine yourself that you're on a river, you're going on a boat. Boat is going in a direction where it's like pitch darkness. Nobody can see the future. All you can do is you are at the back of the boat, you're looking backwards and you have perfect visibility to the past. So the boat is going in one direction, you're standing at the back of the boat, looking at the waters which are going past you. So that's the past. The boat you are in represents present, and the pitch darkness in front of the boat represents the future. You have no idea what the future will bring. All you know is you're looking at the past, but the past is gone. It doesn't exist anymore. So you're just living in the present, right? So that's all life is ultimately. And you got to ask yourself, what does this mean? Where is this going towards? It's very difficult to talk about anything because ultimately it's only pitch darkness in front of you. For anyone for that matter, right? All life forms have the same problem. So I think once we reconceptualize our existence and the way we relate to the workplace, I think all of us can add fantastic value because I think all of us are brilliant in our own way. It's just that we need to find out what makes us brilliant and keep working on it. I think once that happens, I think both we are going to benefit and also the larger society around us.
Thank you for joining us on Swing State. I hope today's conversation left you with ideas, questions, and maybe even a spark of courage to apply what you learned today in your own journey. What we explore here, whether it's leadership, pivots, judgment, ancient wisdom, or resilience, it is meant to remind us that learning is not about titles. Leadership is not about titles. It's about choices, actions, and how we walk the talk every single day. If you enjoyed this episode, please do subscribe, leave a comment, and share it with someone who might find inspiration in these stories. Your support helps us bring diverse voices such as Vinod's to this platform. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep swinging forward.